After adjusting my skirt and inhaling deeply, I opened Chad's new office's hefty wood door. The plaque that said, Chad Harley, President, still shined. With a frown, my spouse looked up from his computer. "I'm so busy, Rosie. What's that?" he asked. I forced a smile to appear. "The Henderson account files are ready for inspection by you, and the staff meeting starts in 10 minutes. Chad dismissively waved his hand. "Stop it. I have more pressing matters to attend to." All this week, everyone had been working on their presentations, anticipating that you would, he said, his eyes never leaving the screen. I said, "Cancel it. That's an order, not a request." I bit my tongue and gave a brief nod before turning away. I noticed Chad's reflection in the window as I shut the door. He didn't even notice that his comments hurt because he was already lost in his task. Once more, I leaned against the wall in the corridor, wanting my heart to slow down. The Chad I had married was not this one. My beloved had a strong interest in architecture and a strong commitment to his group. It appeared that the elegant title had reached his brain directly. "Everything all right, Rosie?" When I looked up, Chad's father, Edward, was worriedly observing me. He continued to visit the office regularly even after retiring. I stood up straight and forced a grin. It was just a busy morning. "Of course, Edward. How are you doing?" He took a moment to examine me. "I'm all right, but you don't appear to be. How has my son fared lately?" I wavered, caught between annoyance and allegiance. "Really, it's nothing. Chad is still getting used to his new position." Edward's gaze grew strained. Letting it go to his head, Chad's voice exploded out of his office before I could say anything. "Rosie, where are those files?" I took the folder off my desk and gave Edward a pitying glance. "Duty calls." Chad hardly looked up as I walked back into his office. "At last, as you leave them there and shut the door, Chad," I uttered while bracing myself. "You are needed by the team for this meeting. They put a lot of effort into it." His hand smacked into the desk. "God damn it, Rosie. I'm the president right now. Not you or anybody else determines what's significant. You get it." His shout stunned me and I flinched. "Chad, I'm only attempting to assist. Your father loves this company so much, and I told him I would. My father isn't the boss anymore." Chad cut in with a chilled tone. "I am. Perhaps you shouldn't be here also if you can't handle that." The words struck me hard. Looking for signs of the man I had fallen in love with, all I saw in him was a stranger overcome with ego and power. As I peered at him, I muttered, "Fine," to myself. "I'll postpone the meeting." Chad's phone beeped. As I turned to go, he adopted a smooth, charming tone. "Yes, I am looking forward to our business lunch. Lisa, my sweetheart. See you shortly." At the doorknob, my hand froze. Lisa. Even though I didn't know the name, I was shivering when Chad mentioned it. I turned to look back and saw a cunning smile on his face before he realized I was observing. "Don't you have things to do?" he yelled. With a wordless nod, I left the office, my head spinning. As I announced the cancellation of the meeting, our team's disgruntled expressions met me outside. But the dread that was growing inside of me was far more than their frustration. What kind of business lunch made my husband smile that much, and who was Lisa? I was confident now, as I fell into my chair, that this company and my marriage were going to experience a storm for which none of us were ready. I was determined to salvage as much as possible from yesterday's calamity. So I arrived at the office early the following morning. There was a noticeable sense of anxiety as I moved through the bullpen. As I walked by, the whispers stopped and were replaced by fake smiles and awkward nods. "Morning, Rosie. Any update on rescheduling the meeting?" Jasmine, our lead designer, asked. I wavered, caught between tact and truth. "Jasmine, I'm working on it. Chad is getting used to his new position." Jasmine raised her eyebrows. "Getting used? Is that the new name we're using for it?" Chad's loud voice filled the office before I could reply. "Rosie, my office now." I quickly approached Chad's door and stood ready. He was pacing, waves of irritation emanating from him. He threw a stack of papers at me and exclaimed, "What the hell is this?" With a sinking heart, I skimmed over the top sheet. The design team had filed a formal complaint, pointing out Chad's tardiness in project approvals and his absence from important meetings. "Chad, they are simply irritated. If we could arrange a meeting to talk about their issues." His tone was mocking. "This is a business, not a daycare that I am managing. They are free to leave if they are unable to bear the pressure." "But Chad, these are the people your father trusts the most. They have years of experience with the organization." His eyes flickered erratically. "My father is no longer in command. I am, and I will not allow a group of arrogant designers to undermine my authority." Taking a deep breath, I prepared myself. "Please, Chad, this isn't who you are. What's actually happening?" I briefly had a glimpse of the previous Chad, weak, insecure, but it was gone as soon as it materialized. "There's nothing happening," he yelled. "Just carry out your duties and discipline them. Isn't that what I'm paying you for?" He was unaware of how much the words hurt. I was more than simply his employee. I was also his partner and wife. I felt like I was. Chad's phone beeped as I turned to go, his mischievous smile growing across his face. He took a quick look at it. "I'm leaving for lunch now. Please hold my calls." "But Chad, we have a client meeting at 1, I said. He replied, "Reschedule it," as he was already leaving. I felt a knot build in my stomach as I watched him leave. Something was seriously wrong here. This was no longer just about the work. Once I was back at my desk, I threw myself into damage control, calming down irate clients and settling staff grievances. By mid-afternoon, I felt drained and nervous. I was surprised by a soft knock on my cubicle. When I looked up, Edward had a worried expression on his face. "Rosie, dear, got a minute?" Edward inquired. I nodded, and he took a seat across from me, looking at me with a pleasant but curious expression. Whispering, he admitted, "I've been sensing things about Chad, about how he's running the company." I bit down on my lip, unsure how to react. How could I tell Edward his son's life's work was failing when he had given everything to him? "Edward, He hushed me by raising a hand. "Rosie, you don't need to shield him from me. For a time now, I've known something wasn't right. I simply hoped he would develop into the man he was meant to be." My eyes pricked with tears. "I don't know what to do. He's not going to hear me. He's shoving them all away." Edward grabbed my hand and reached across the desk. "Rosie, we'll work this out collectively. This family and this company are everything to me. I'm not going to let Chad ruin it." Chad's words echoed through the office again at that same moment. "Who the devil is left behind? We have a job to do, don't we?" Edward and I looked at each other. The storm had not yet passed. Edward's words rang true in my head as I readied to confront whatever problem Chad had now created. United for the first time in many weeks, hope flickered in my mind, but that hope faded as I rounded the corner and found Chad standing there, a stray tie and a smattering of lipstick on his collar. I had no control over the man I loved, and I was losing him. Tired from yet another day of damage repair at the office, I trudged up the driveway. I just wanted a glass of wine and a nice bath, but the front door opened to reveal a gorgeous blonde. As I reached for my keys, her top was buttoned hurriedly, and her lipstick was a little smudged. When she spotted me, her eyes widened with recognition, and she froze. "Oh, you must be Rosie," she mewed as she immediately got better. "I'm Lisa, Chad's consultant." The globe swung in one direction. Lisa, the lipstick on his collar, the name from Chad's phone call. With terrible clarity, everything fell into place. "Consultant," I succeeded in speaking hardly audibly above a whisper. A menacing smirk curved Lisa's lips. "Indeed, Chad and I have been collaborating closely. You know, he's really quite the genius." Chad stood in the doorway, his face red. Before I could reply, he said, "Rosie, you're home already." I looked at him, trying to find any sign of regret or guilt, but all I saw was calculation and fear. He hurriedly said Lisa was just leaving, and led her to her car. They shot each other a pointed look, and then she drove off, leaving me with my husband, a man I felt I knew nothing about. My head spinning, I brushed by Chad and entered the home with his justifications already in hand. He followed. "Rosie, you're not thinking it right. Lisa is merely assisting on a few new projects. We were generating concepts for—" I turned to look at him. "Avoid, Chad. You have no right to lie to me, not right now." His act slipped, his mask crumbling. "It wasn't my intention for this to occur. It simply did. It just happened." I raised my voice. "You simply forgot what you were supposed to do at work, as though you've suddenly decided to treat your workers, our friends, like filth." Chad's face became stern. "You're not aware of the strain I'm experiencing. My father left me to walk in difficult shoes. I'm exerting all of my effort via engaging in adultery and destroying the business. I'm not." He trailed off, his expression filled with annoyance. "Look, I can solve this, but things got tricky. We can resolve this." As soon as I said the words, I understood that they were true. Everything we owned, including our marriage and partnership, was destroyed as a result of Chad's treachery and my own heedless devotion. Chad's cell rang, and he looked at it with a confused look on his face. "Near it's Lisa, isn't it?" Silently, I said nothing. He did not refute it. "Rosie, please let me clarify." However, I had had enough of listening to him and justifying him. After grabbing my keys, I made my way to the door. "Where are you going?" Chad called. "Get away from me," I fired back. "I need to think." Tears clouded my vision as I drove through the evening streets. How did we get to this point? The life we had created together and the man I loved were collapsing all around me. My cell phone rang. The name Edward flickered across the screen. After hesitating, I responded, "How are you doing, Rosie?" You hurried out of the office. Something inside me broke at his worry. When the dam broke, I started spilling the beans about Chad's affair, the business's current predicament, and my own broken heart. Edward was silent while he listened. He whispered softly when I was done, "Oh, I'm so sorry, Rosie. I am entirely to blame for this. I shouldn't have put Chad under so much stress." I pushed. "It's not your fault. Chad made his choices." Edward sighed. "However, we must now create our own path. Visit my home. We'll work together to resolve this." I felt an odd serenity descend upon me as I turned into Edward's neighborhood. Chad's betrayal was exposed, so the worst had happened, but I wasn't alone. I felt a flicker of strength return for the first time in months. I would take whatever came next head-on. No more justifications or naive allegiance. It was time to stand up for what had become my second home, myself, and the firm. I held my head high as I entered the office, not caring about the looks and murmurs that passed by. I was resolved to face anything that came my way. After speaking with Edward last night, nothing could have prepared me for what I saw. Chad was standing in the center of the bullpen, his arm around Lisa's waist. A few months earlier, she wouldn't have looked out of place on me in the pencil skirt and blouse she was wearing. "To all of you, may I introduce you to Lisa," declared Chad, breaking the startled stillness. "She'll become part of the group as a special consultant." I met Chad's gaze, my heart hammering in my ears. His stare was defiant, daring me to act out. Lisa grinned, obviously enjoying her newfound status in the group and in my husband's embrace. Our chief designer, Jasmine, was the first to speak. "But Mr. Harley, we already have a full team." I started to explain. "Rosie," Chad cut in sharply, "will be helping Lisa get up to speed, won't you, dear?" Everybody looked at me, my coworker's mixture of curiosity and sympathy palpable. I inhaled deeply and forced a grin that seemed more like a grimace. "Welcome aboard, Lisa," I said, obviously strained. The following few hours passed in a whirl of compelled smiles and barely concealed stress. I went to my office and tried to concentrate on my job, but I couldn't stop thinking about Chad's betrayal. I was jolted out of my reverie by a knock at my door. It was Edward, a worried expression on his face. "I just heard, Rosie. Are you okay?" I shook my head, trying not to cry. "Edward, I'm not sure how much more of this I can handle. Chad seems determined to harm me in every manner imaginable." Edward's face became stern. "This is over. I'm requesting that the board meet immediately. Chad has crossed a line." Before I could reply, Chad stormed into the office, his face flushed with rage. "What the hell do you think you're doing, Dad?" he growled. "I now own this corporation. You cannot simply barge in here." Edward's voice bellowed, "Enough," and Chad fell silent. "You've turned all I created into a farce. You need to accept the consequences now." Chad narrowed his gaze. "Results? I'm only now beginning." He dug into his jacket for an envelope and tossed it onto my desk. "Consider this my first official act as president." I shook my hands and opened the envelope. Divorce papers that Chad had already signed were inside. "You're firing me?" I uttered in a whisper, feeling a wave of shock and pain. Chad laughed acily. "Stopping you off, Rosie. Oh no, I'm releasing you from everything, even this career and this marriage." My world was collapsing around me as I gazed at the documents. A few papers of legal craft reduced all those years and ambitions to nothing. "Chad, please," Edward begged, "reflect on your actions. For this business, Rosie has been the pillar. In her absence, now that she's gone, we can really get moving." Chad angrily retorted, "Speak the truth, Dad. Your method of operation is out of date. For the future, Lisa and I have amazing ambitions." I felt a peculiar calmness descend upon me while they argued. I glanced over the divorce decree and then looked at Chad, this outsider with my husband's face. I made a choice at that precise moment. "I'll sign." I mutely interrupted their tense conversation. Startled, both men turned to face me. Chad regained his composure first, a smug smile lighting up his face. "Rosie, I knew you'd see sense. Really, it's for the best." I maintained a steady glance. "Chad, you're right, though not for the reasons you may believe. It is for the best." My hand was steady as I signed the documents. I felt a burden lift from my shoulders. Even though Chad had ended our marriage, I was no longer going to be a victim. I got up and declared, "I quit, effective immediately." Chad flinched from his smirk. "What? You just can't do that." I cut in. "I can, and I am. Chad, good luck managing this business without me. You will need it." Head held high, I heard Edward's voice behind me as I left the office. "Rosie, wait." I stopped and turned around. Pride and resolve mixed together in Edward's eyes. "I have a proposition for you, one that could potentially save this company and give you the new beginning that you deserve." I sensed hope for the first time in months. I was prepared to face whatever came next on my own terms. With my hands clasped around a steaming mug of tea, I took a seat across from Edward in his quaint home office. The last several days' events whirled around in my head like a tempest. Edward said in a soft but forceful voice, "Rosie, I want you to join my nonprofit architectural trust as an employee. Someone with your abilities and moral character is needed." Surprised, I blinked. "But Edward, what about the company?" Edward cut in. Chad made his choice, a trace of grief visible in his gaze. "Now it's time for you to make yours." A fresh route opened up in front of me as I thought about his offer. My phone rang. It was Jasmine's SMS. "Speak up here. Everything is collapsing. Lisa and Chad are running the place." "Until it collapses, Rosie, you are needed." My heart tightened. I still cared deeply about the company and the individuals I'd worked with for years. "Despite everything," I said to Edward, "I need time to think." He gave a sympathetic nod. Naturally, but don't delay too much. Chad won't waste any time demolishing everything we've created. Determined, I made myself strong and went into the office one more time the following morning to tidy my desk. Tension was palpable in the air. Murmurs would abruptly stop as I walked by. Jasmine arrived at my home, her face etched with worry, just as I was packing. "I'm so glad you're here, Rosie. It's a catastrophe. Chad has shelved 3 significant projects, and Lisa has been reassigning teams without considering their level of experience. Customers are enraged." "Jasmine, I'm no longer employed here," I interrupted, my voice strained. "There's nothing I can do." Jasmine's eyes widened. "Are you heading out? But what about us? How will the business work out?" Chad's voice erupted from the hallway before I could reply. "Rosie, what are you doing here?" Lisa followed him in, shadowing him proudly. As he stormed in, refusing to be intimidated, I responded calmly, "I'm just gathering my belongings." Chad narrowed his gaze. "All right, leaving as soon as possible would be ideal. Lisa can handle your obligations with more than ease." I couldn't contain my laughter. "Is she? Are our customers threatening to leave because of this? Why is there chaos among the staff?" With flawlessly manicured nails, Lisa stepped forward and dug her nails into Chad's arm. "I'll let you know that I'm working really hard. I seem like a natural to Chad," she said. "I'm sure he does," I retorted professionally, "but running a successful architectural firm takes far more than just being a natural." Anger reddened Chad's face. "That's sufficient. Leave, Rosie. This place no longer welcomes you." There was a ruckus in the corridor as I was gathering up my box of possessions. 2 board members surrounded Edward, who was speaking in a steely voice. "What's going on here?" Chad made a demand. Edward explained, "Hey, son, emergency board meeting. We're here to talk about your future as president because the company is at risk due to your recent decisions." Chad's bluster crumbled and he paled. "This is not something you can accomplish. I am now in command." "We'll investigate that," a board member said somberly. I noticed Edward as the group made its way to the conference room. "Rosie, we could use your perspective in this meeting if you're willing," Edward said. I hesitated, unsure how to reconcile my commitment to the company I'd helped develop with my desire to clear my hands of this mess. Chad scoffed. "Dad, she is no longer employed here. She is voiceless." A part of me broke, but I straightened my shoulders and put my box down. "In all honesty, I believe I will attend this meeting. It appears that only I am aware of the true operations of this company." As we entered the conference room, Edward grinned confidently while Lisa gasped and Chad stuttered. A jolt of resolve shot through me. It was now about defending the legacy Edward had created and the jobs of all the employees, not just about myself. I was prepared to fight whatever came next, not for Chad, not for our failing marriage, but for the business and the people I held dear. It was time to prove my abilities to everyone, especially Chad. As I presented the harsh reality of the company's circumstances, the boardroom erupted into a frenzy of tension. The table was cluttered with reports and spreadsheets, all harsh cries of Chad's mismanagement. "We've lost 3 major clients in the last month alone," I said, maintaining my composure in the face of my heartbreak. "Our reputation in the industry is in free fall, and employee satisfaction is at an all-time low." Chad's expression was a mix of incredulity and rage. "This is absurd. We're doing great. I've been developing new tactics with Lisa that will push us deeper into the market." Edward cut in, his tone harsh. "The numbers don't lie." I noticed the concerned looks that passed between the board members. This was the crucial moment that would decide the future of the company we had all devoted our lives to creating. Lisa spoke up, "But Chad has put in a lot of work. He's been staying late every night to generate creative ideas." I couldn't resist laughing. "Is that what you call it?" From where I'm standing, All I see is a failing business and a president who seems more focused on his personal life than his work obligations. Chad's eyes flickered menacingly. Rosie, you have no idea what you're talking about. You're just resentful because I moved on. Moved on? I laughed hysterically. You ruined our union, and now you're ruining this business. You're destroying everything, Chad. That's not going on. Mr. Hawkins, the oldest member of the board, cleared his throat. We've heard enough. In my opinion, immediate action is required to salvage this business. Chad hesitated, a mixture of perplexity and desperation on his face. What are you saying? Mr. Hawkins continued, I'm advocating that we think about hiring new leadership, effective immediately. Chaos broke out in the room. Lisa screamed in protest, Chad yelled accusations, and the board members quarreled. I sat silently through it all, a strange peace falling over me. Chad suddenly turned to me, his eyes beseeching. Rosie, please, I need your assistance. Let them know I can solve this. Tell them we can collaborate, just like we did in the past. I looked into his eyes and saw a glimmer of the man he once was, terrified, weak, asking for help. But then Lisa's possessive hand wrapped around his arm, pulling him back into her orbit. I whispered, I'm sorry, Chad, you made your decision. You now have to deal with the fallout. With a voice that broke through the confusion, Edward stood up. I propose that we cast our votes to keep Chad leading this company. Raise your hand if you are in favor of taking Chad's presidency away from him. As the hands started to rise, 1, 2, 3, indicating a definite majority, time seemed to slow. Chad's expression fell as he realized how true this was. This isn't fair. Lisa cried out, You can't do this to us. But it was finished. With Chad gone, my beloved companionship was in jeopardy. Edward took me aside as we wrapped up the meeting. You're needed, Rosie. The business requires you. Will you return and assist us in rebuilding? I paused, unsure how to balance my yearning for a new beginning with my desire to help. Chad came over to me before I could respond, his desperate, red-rimmed eyes shining. Rosie, please, he pleaded. Keep them from doing this. Nobody knows me as you do. If you just give me another chance, you know I can make this right. I felt the pressure of their expectations bearing down on me as I looked from Chad to Edward. Both the companies and my personal futures were in jeopardy. It dawned on me that this was about more than just rescuing a company. It was about defending who I was, what I was worth, and all that I had labored so hard to accomplish. Taking a deep breath, I made my decision. Whatever happened next would be very different. With a sea of expectant faces in front of me, I stood on stage. The recent turmoil had prompted the demand for a company-wide meeting, and as the newly appointed temporary CEO, it was my responsibility to steer us in the right direction. As many of you are aware, our company has had a turbulent few weeks. I started maintaining my composure in spite of my beating heart. But this is the start of something fresh, I declared, catching a glimpse of Chad disappearing into the rear of the room with a gaunt face. Lisa had vanished from view. Yes, we have lost customers, and there have been setbacks, I continued. However, the core of this organization, the skill, commitment, and vision that each of you brings to your work, does not change. A chuckle of agreement echoed through the assembly. I continued detailing our strategy for restoring client confidence and achieving financial stability. I could see hope returning in my colleagues' eyes as I spoke. Suddenly, Chad's voice broke through the silence. This is all lies, he shouted, running down the aisle. Rosie is attempting to steal my business. She planned the entire event to oust me. Whispers and gasps flooded the space. Grasping the podium, I forced myself to remain composed. Chad, this isn't the time or place. His face reddened with wrath. It's exactly the time. You made my father oppose me. You played with the board. That's enough, Chad. Edward's voice reverberated from the side of the stage. With a confident step, He placed his hand on my shoulder. "Chad, you put yourself through this. We've arrived at this stage because of your choices and behaviors." Chad glanced frantically from Edward to me. "Please, Dad, she can't be allowed to do this. It is a legacy from our family." Edward's face relaxed slightly. "Son, the building's name isn't the only thing that makes a legacy. It all comes down to honesty, diligence, and doing what is right for our clients and staff. Rosie understands that. It's time you do, too." An uneasy quiet descended upon the space. I could feel all eyes on us, curious to see how this family drama would play out. Chad appeared to be losing the struggle as his shoulders slumped. "That's it then," Chad said bitterly. "I'm simply leaving." I moved away from the podium and walked warily toward Chad. "Chad, it doesn't have to mean this is it. If you're prepared to work for it, you can still have a place here." I briefly caught a glimpse of the unsure and vulnerable man I had previously adored, but suddenly his face became stern. "Neither your sympathy, Dad, nor yours, Rosie, is needed. I'll launch my own business. You'll see. I'll construct something superior and much larger." He then pivoted on his heel and raced out, leaving a startled hush behind him. I gathered my thoughts and made my way back to the podium, fully conscious of the hundreds of eyes watching me. With a little tremble in my voice, I said, "I know that was hard to witness, but it's a perfect example of why we're here today. This company isn't about the ambition or ego of one individual. It's about collaborating with each other to produce something truly remarkable." I took a moment to process the words and then looked out at the expressions of my colleagues, some hopeful, some doubtful, all waiting for guidance. I can't guarantee it will be simple. We still have a long way to go. However, I can assure you that every choice I make will be beneficial for this business and the individuals who contribute to its success. All of you are vital to that success. I felt a burden lift from my shoulders as I charted our course forward. The worst was over. Chad was out of the picture, and his desperate attempt to discredit me had failed. For once, I could take the lead on my terms. However, as I met Edward's gaze, I noticed a glimmer of concern. I came to understand that although one part of this story was coming to an end, there was still more to come. The true litmus test for my leadership and the dedication to our business was yet to come. I was standing at my new office window, staring out at the metropolitan skyline, 6 months after that fateful corporate meeting. The view was different now that I was in Edward's charitable trust building, but so was my perspective on the world. I was startled out of my reverie by a knock at the door. "Come in," I called out, and Jasmine entered with a smile on her face. "You won't believe this, Rosie. The Henderson project is a success," she exclaimed. I couldn't resist grinning. I had always wanted to produce creative, socially conscious design work, and the Henderson project was just that. "You're very right, Jasmine. The group must be delighted." "They are," she said with a nod, her eagerness palpable. "But there's more information you should be aware of." I lifted an eyebrow, observing as Jasmine inhaled deeply. "Chad's company is filed for bankruptcy this morning. They filed for Chapter 11. The news felt like a punch to the gut. Despite everything, I had hoped Chad would find his way. "And Chad?" I inquired silently. "No one has seen him in days," Jasmine retorted gravely. "Lisa came in earlier to look for work. She said that Chad had abandoned her." I took a seat, trying to process it all. There was no longer the Chad I had known and loved. What stood in his place was a cautionary tale, a reminder of how easily prosperity could be destroyed if it wasn't built on solid ground. Edward appeared in the doorway as if summoned by my thoughts. "I heard the news," he murmured. "How are you holding up?" I forced a tiny smile. "I'm doing fine. It's simply too much to process." With pride and sadness mingled in his eyes, Edward nodded. "Rosie, you've accomplished amazing things here. You're transforming lives with the projects you're working on and this new wing of the trust." "We're not just changing lives," I told him. I couldn't have done any of this without your support." Edward waved away my thanks. "It's you, Rosie. You transformed a horrible circumstance into something lovely. It's a unique gift." Left alone with my thoughts as Edward and Jasmine departed, I pondered Chad, our shared existence, and our dreams together. I thought of Lisa and how she had lost everything due to her quest for wealth and prestige. Mostly, though, my thoughts turned to me, the woman I'd been at the beginning, frightened to speak up for herself, but wanting to please. She now seemed almost like a stranger. My phone buzzed, startling me. It was a text from an unknown number. "It's Chad. Is it possible for us to speak?" I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. I would have leaped at the chance 6 months ago. I inhaled deeply and composed my reply. "Chad, I apologize, but I've moved on. I wish you tranquility." As I clicked send, I felt the last strands of my former life unravel. Ahead of me lay a future brimming with opportunity and promise. I was jolted out of my thoughts when my crew knocked on my door, eager to get to work on the Henderson project. "Please enter," I said with a grin. "Let's build something amazing." As we gathered around the conference table, thoughts flowing freely, I experienced a wave of thankfulness. It was here, on my own 2 feet, surrounded by individuals who appreciated and accepted me for who I was, that I felt I truly belonged. I was not defined by my relationship with Chad or anyone else. I had arrived at a position of strength, purpose, and self-discovery, despite the difficult journey. I knew that the best was still to come. Turning to face my crew, all of whom had bright, excited smiles, I said, "Okay," while grabbing a marker. "Let's reimagine the future together." In that moment, I realized that this work, this life I had created from the ashes of my previous one, was my actual happily ever after. It wasn't a fairy tale ending, but something much more priceless, a fresh start made with my own hands and heart. Even though the journey ahead wouldn't always be simple, I was prepared for any difficulties that might arise. I understood that my value was independent of other people's deeds or viewpoints. It originated from within, from the resiliency and strength I had found within myself, and that was the greatest win of all.